My name is Sarah Chen, and 18 months ago, I thought I had everything figured out. I was 32 years old, living in downtown Chicago, working as a senior marketing manager at Henderson & Associates. It wasn't the most glamorous job in the world, but it was mine. I'd earned it through 6 years of 60-hour weeks, missed vacations, and saying yes to every project that came my way. The office was one of those modern spaces with exposed brick walls and open floor plans that were supposed to encourage collaboration, but mostly just meant you could hear everyone's phone calls. My desk was in the corner, right next to the window that looked out over Michigan Avenue. I'd chosen that spot deliberately. I wanted to see the city, to remind myself every day that I was part of something bigger. I was dating David Torres, a construction foreman I'd met at a coffee shop 3 years earlier. He was different from the corporate guys I usually dated. He worked with his hands, built things that lasted, came home covered in dust and honest sweat. There was something grounding about him, something real. When the marketing world got too fake, too political, too exhausting, David would remind me that there was a world outside of brand strategies and client presentations. We lived together in a one-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. David had built custom shelves for my books, installed dimmer switches so I could work late without disturbing him, even created a small office space in the corner of our bedroom. He was always doing little things like that, thoughtful gestures that made me feel supported and loved. At work I was known for being thorough, reliable, and creative. I wasn't the loudest person in meetings, but when I spoke, people listened. I had a reputation for turning around struggling accounts, for finding the human story behind every brand. My colleagues respected me, my boss trusted me, and my clients appreciated my attention to detail. That's probably why I didn't see Marcus Webb coming. Marcus was hired about 8 months before everything fell apart. He was 35, tall and lean with prematurely gray hair that made him look distinguished. He'd come from a boutique agency in New York, with impressive credentials and a confident smile. He specialized in luxury brands and high-end retail, the kind of accounts that required sophistication and cultural awareness. From the beginning, Marcus was charming. He remembered everyone's coffee orders, asked about their weekends, complimented their work in meetings. He had this way of making you feel like you were the most interesting person in the room. He'd lean in when you talked, nod thoughtfully at your ideas, ask follow-up questions that showed he was really listening. I was flattered by his attention. When he asked about my projects, I thought he was being collegial. When he offered to help with research, I thought he was being generous. When he suggested we grab drinks after work to discuss strategy, I thought he was being professional. Marcus's desk was directly across from mine, separated by a low partition that barely came up to my shoulders when I was sitting. He could see my computer screen if he wanted to, watch me work, observe my habits. I thought nothing of it. The open office concept was supposed to encourage transparency after all. He'd often comment on my work as I was doing it. "Interesting angle on the Morrison account," he'd say, or "I love how you're approaching the demographic analysis." At first I appreciated the feedback. It felt like having a mentor, someone who understood the creative process. But Marcus was also competitive in ways that weren't immediately obvious. He'd ask detailed questions about my client relationships, my project timelines, my strategic thinking. He'd want to know about my research methods, my creative process, my presentation techniques. He framed it as professional curiosity, but looking back, I realize he was conducting an audit of my skills and methods. The Henderson Group account came to me in February. It was the biggest opportunity of my career, a national retail chain with over 200 stores, looking for a complete brand overhaul. They were losing market share to online competitors and needed to reinvent themselves for a younger demographic. The contract was worth nearly $2 million, and whoever led the account would almost certainly be promoted to senior director. I threw myself into the Henderson project with everything I had. I spent weeks researching their target market, analyzing their competitors, studying retail trends. I visited their stores across the Midwest, talked to customers, interviewed employees. I created detailed personas for their ideal customers, mapped their customer journey, identified pain points and opportunities. The work was exhausting but exhilarating. I'd come home late, buzzing with ideas, and talk David's ear off about consumer behavior and brand positioning. He'd listen patiently, ask thoughtful questions, help me organize my thoughts. He even helped me create a filing system for all my research, suggesting I back up everything to cloud storage and keep physical copies of the most important documents. "You're going to nail this," he'd tell me, rubbing my shoulders as I worked late into the night. "This is your moment." Marcus watched my Henderson work with obvious interest. He'd hover near my desk when I was on client calls, offer unsolicited advice about retail strategy, suggest books and articles that might be helpful. He'd never worked with a retail client before, but he was suddenly fascinated by the industry. "Henderson's is such an interesting case study," he'd say. "Mind if I take a look at some of your research? I'm thinking about expanding into retail myself." I was happy to share. That's the kind of person I was: collaborative, generous with my knowledge, always willing to help a colleague learn something new. I showed him my market research, my customer surveys, my competitive analysis. I even let him sit in on a few client calls, thinking it would be good for him to see how retail clients operated. Marcus was full of praise for my work. "Your insights are incredible," he'd say. "You really understand the customer psychology. I'm learning so much from watching you work." The compliments felt good. I was proud of the Henderson project, proud of the depth of my research, proud of the creative solutions I was developing. Marcus's admiration felt like validation from a peer, recognition that my work was truly exceptional. But there were small things that bothered me, moments that didn't quite add up. Sometimes I'd come in to find my computer still logged in when I was sure I'd shut it down. Files would be organized differently than I remembered. My desk would be slightly rearranged, as if someone had been going through my papers. When I mentioned these things to David, he'd suggest I was working too hard, that stress was making me paranoid. "You're putting so much pressure on yourself," he'd say. "Maybe you're just forgetting things." The IT department said it was probably just system updates, automatic backups, normal network activity, nothing to worry about. But I started changing my passwords more frequently, locking my desk drawers, keeping my most sensitive documents at home. Marcus noticed my increased security measures. "Getting paranoid," he'd joke. "Don't worry, we're all on the same team here." But were we? 3 weeks before my Henderson presentation, I started noticing changes in David's behavior. He'd always been punctual, but suddenly he was coming home later, claiming his construction projects were running behind schedule. He'd always been affectionate, but suddenly he seemed distracted, distant. He'd check his phone constantly, step outside to take calls, shower immediately when he got home. When I asked about his day, his stories became vague and repetitive. "Just the usual," he'd say. "You know how it is." But I didn't know how it was, because he'd stopped telling me. I attributed his behavior to stress. Construction was a tough industry, and David's company had been struggling to land new contracts. Maybe he was worried about job security, embarrassed about their financial situation. I tried to be understanding, supportive, patient. Meanwhile, Marcus was becoming increasingly interested in my personal life. He'd ask about my relationship, my living situation, my weekend plans. He'd want to know about David's work, his schedule, his interests. He framed it as friendly curiosity, but the questions felt intrusive. "David's in construction, right?" he'd say. "That must be tough, all those long hours. Does he understand how demanding your job is?" I'd defend David, explain that he was supportive of my career, that he understood the pressures of the Henderson account. But Marcus would nod sympathetically, as if he knew something I didn't. "It's hard when partners are in such different industries," he'd say. "Sometimes they just don't get it." Looking back, I realized Marcus was planting seeds of doubt, trying to create tension in my relationship. He was studying my vulnerabilities, identifying weak points he could exploit later. The weekend before my Henderson presentation, I decided to work from home to avoid distractions. I spread all my materials across our dining room table: research reports, customer surveys, creative concepts, presentation slides. It was months of work, organized and ready for final review. David was unusually interested in my work that weekend. He'd bring me coffee, look over my shoulder at my computer screen, ask detailed questions about my presentation strategy. He even offered to help me practice, to play the role of a Henderson executive, and give me feedback. "You should probably back all this up," he said, looking at the documents spread across the table. "What if something happens to your computer?" I appreciated his concern. I uploaded everything to cloud storage, created backup files, organized everything in labeled folders. David helped me with the technical aspects, showing me how to create redundant backups, how to sync files across multiple devices. "There," he said, closing my laptop. "Now you're totally protected." I felt secure, prepared, ready for the biggest presentation of my career. I had no idea that I was actually handing my enemies the tools they'd use to destroy me. The night before my presentation, I barely slept. I ran through my slides one more time, reviewed my talking points, laid out my presentation clothes. David was already asleep, snoring softly beside me. I watched him for a while, thinking about how our lives were about to change. The Henderson account would mean a promotion, a significant raise, maybe even the opportunity to start our own agency someday. I had no idea that by morning, everything would be gone. The morning of my Henderson presentation, I woke up at 5:30, 2 hours before my alarm. I couldn't sleep, so I decided to get to the office early and run through my slides one more time. I kissed David goodbye. He was still sleeping, and drove downtown through the empty streets. The office was dark and quiet. I loved being there early before the phones started ringing and the meetings began. It was peaceful, productive time when I could think clearly and focus on important work. I settled at my desk, opened my laptop and clicked on the Henderson folder. It was empty. Not just empty, completely gone. 4 months of work, dozens of files, hundreds of hours of research and analysis. Everything I'd created for the Henderson account had vanished overnight. I sat there staring at my screen, feeling like I was in a nightmare. This couldn't be happening. Not today, not now. I checked my backup drives. Corrupted. I logged into my cloud storage. The Henderson folder was there, but it was empty. Every file had been deleted, and the deletion timestamps showed they'd been removed at 2:47 a.m. while I was sleeping. I called IT support, but they wouldn't be in until 8. I tried to recover the files myself, running every data recovery program I could find. Nothing worked. The files were gone, professionally wiped, unrecoverable. By 7:30, other employees were starting to arrive. I was still at my desk, frantically searching through my email for any Henderson-related documents I might have sent to myself. I found a few small files, some early research notes, but nothing substantial. Certainly nothing I could use for a presentation to the most important client of my career. Marcus arrived at 8, looking fresh and confident. He had a large coffee and a briefcase I'd never seen before. "Big day today," he said, settling at his desk. "Ready for Henderson?" I looked up at him, my eyes red from staring at my computer screen. "Marcus, I need your help. Something terrible has happened." He leaned forward, his expression concerned. "What's wrong?" "All my Henderson files are gone. Everything. My presentation, my research, my creative concepts. They were deleted overnight." Marcus's face went pale. "Oh my God, Sarah, that's terrible. Do you have backups? They're corrupted. Everything's gone. What are you going to do? The presentation is in 4 hours." I started to cry. Right there at my desk, in front of my colleagues, I broke down. 4 months of work, the most important project of my career, gone without a trace. Marcus came around to my side of the partition and put his hand on my shoulder. "Sarah, I hate to say this, but I might be able to help." I looked up at him through my tears. "What do you mean?" "I've been so fascinated by your Henderson work that I've been doing some research of my own. I know it's not the same as what you created, but I might have enough material to put together a basic presentation." "You've been researching Henderson. I told you I was interested in expanding into retail. I've been studying their business model, their market position, their competitors. I even visited a few of their stores, talked to some customers." I stared at him. "You did customer research for Henderson. I know it sounds crazy, but I was so inspired by your approach that I wanted to try it myself. I never planned to present it. I was just learning from your methods." Hope flickered in my chest. "Do you think you could help me rebuild the presentation?" Marcus hesitated. "Sarah, I don't know. My research is pretty extensive. It would be more like I'd be presenting my work with your input." "I don't care about credit," I said desperately. "I just need to have something to show Henderson." "Please, let me talk to Janet," Marcus said. "Maybe we can figure something out." Janet Reeves arrived at 8:30, and Marcus immediately pulled her into her office. Through the glass walls, I could see them having an intense conversation. Marcus was showing her something on his laptop, gesturing animatedly. Janet looked concerned, then surprised, then thoughtful. When they came out, Janet called me over. "Sarah, Marcus has filled me in on your situation. This is a disaster, but he thinks he might have a solution. He's been doing independent research on Henderson." I said, "He could help me rebuild the presentation." Janet and Marcus exchanged a look. "Sarah, there's something you need to understand. Marcus's research isn't just independent, it's comprehensive. He's been working on a Henderson strategy for weeks. Marcus opened his laptop and showed me a folder labeled Henderson Group, Strategic Analysis. It contained dozens of files, all time-stamped over the past month. Market research, customer surveys, competitive analysis, creative concepts, presentation slides. It was my work, all of it. Every insight, every analysis, every creative solution I'd developed. But it was organized differently, formatted differently, labeled with Marcus's name. "I don't understand." I said, "This is my research, these are my ideas." Marcus looked uncomfortable. "Sarah, I know there are some similarities between our approaches. Great minds think alike, right? But this is definitely my work. I can show you my research timeline, my interview notes, my creative process." He pulled up a series of files showing his research process. There were time-stamped documents going back weeks, detailed notes from customer interviews, drafts of creative concepts. It looked like months of careful, thorough work, but I knew it was mine. Every insight, every turn of phrase, every strategic recommendation, I'd created all of it. "This is impossible," I said. "You couldn't have independently developed identical research." I know it's surprising, Marcus said, but we were both working on the same problem. We both used similar methodologies. It's not that unusual for researchers to reach similar conclusions. Janet looked between us, clearly uncomfortable. Sarah, I know this is difficult, but we need to focus on the client. Henderson is expecting a presentation in 3 hours. Marcus has a complete strategy ready to go. But it's my work, I said, my voice rising. I can prove it. I have notebooks, handwritten notes, interview recordings. I have digital timestamps, Marcus said quietly. Email chains, file creation dates, research documentation. Sarah, I know you're upset about losing your work, but you can't claim ownership of someone else's project. I felt like I was going insane. I was looking at months of my own work, my own ideas, my own creative solutions, but somehow they belonged to Marcus Webb. I need to make a decision, Janet said. Henderson is our biggest potential client. We can't cancel the presentation, and we can't go in unprepared. Marcus, are you ready to present? I am, Marcus said, though I wish the circumstances were different. Then you'll present at noon. Sarah, I'm sorry about your data loss, but Marcus will represent the company for Henderson. I watched my career, my future, my dreams slip away in that moment. Marcus would present my work to my client, secure my promotion, build his reputation on my ideas, but I wasn't ready to give up. Janet, I need to call Henderson. I need to explain what happened, to tell them about my work on their account. Absolutely not, Janet said firmly. We're not going to look incompetent by airing our internal problems. Marcus will present, and that's final. I spent the rest of the morning in a daze, watching Marcus prepare for his presentation. He was calm, confident, completely comfortable with the material. He knew my work better than I did, could discuss every detail, every nuance, every strategic recommendation. At noon, Marcus walked into the conference room with Patricia Kim, the Henderson Group's marketing director, and her team. I watched through the glass walls as he presented my work, my ideas, my creative solutions. He was brilliant, engaging, passionate about the strategy. Patricia and her team were impressed. They nodded, took notes, asked thoughtful questions. Marcus answered everything perfectly, demonstrating deep understanding of their business, their customers, their challenges. By the end of the presentation, it was clear that Henderson and Associates had won the account. Marcus had secured the biggest client in the company's history, using my work. After the meeting, Patricia approached me in the hallway. Sarah, I wanted to thank you for all your preliminary work on our account. Marcus mentioned that you'd done some initial research that helped inform his strategy. Initial research. Months of work, reduced to initial research. Actually, Patricia, I'd love to talk to you about the project. I've been working on Henderson for months, and I have some additional insights that might be valuable. Patricia looked confused. I thought Marcus was the lead on our account. There's been some confusion about that. If you have a few minutes, I'd like to explain. Sarah. Marcus appeared beside us, his voice calm but firm. Patricia, thank you so much for your time today. I know you have a busy schedule. Patricia looked between us, clearly sensing tension. Of course, Marcus, I look forward to working with you on this project. As she walked away, Marcus turned to me. Sarah, I know today was difficult, but you need to accept what happened. I'm sorry you lost your work, but you can't undermine my client relationships. That evening, I drove home in a fog of disbelief and rage. I'd lost the biggest opportunity of my career, watched my colleagues steal my work, seen my future crumble in a single morning. I needed David. I needed his support, his comfort, his assurance that everything would be okay. I needed someone to tell me that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't imagining things, that justice would eventually prevail. But when I got home, David was packing. Sarah, we need to talk, he said, not looking up from his suitcase. David, I had the worst day of my life. Marcus stole my work, my presentation, my client. I don't know what I'm going to do. That's actually what I wanted to talk about, he said, finally meeting my eyes. I can't do this anymore. Do what? Us, this relationship. I'm leaving. I stared at him, unable to process what he was saying. What do you mean you're leaving? I mean I'm moving out, tonight. I've been seeing someone else, and I'm moving in with her. The words hit me like a physical blow. First Marcus, now David. In a single day, I'd lost my career and my relationship. How long? I whispered. 2 months, he said. I'm sorry, Sarah. I didn't plan for it to happen this way. Who is she? David hesitated. You don't know her. She works downtown. What's her name? Sarah. It doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm not happy anymore. We've grown apart, and I've found someone who understands me better. I sat down on our bed, watching him pack 3 years of our life into 2 suitcases. This isn't real, I said. This can't be happening. I know the timing is terrible, David said, with everything that happened at work today, but I can't keep living a lie. The way he said everything that happened at work today made me look up. How do you know about my work situation? You just told me, about Marcus and your presentation. I mentioned Marcus's name, but I didn't give you details. How do you know about the presentation? David's face went pale. You must have told me about it before. I never mentioned Marcus's name to you before today. I never told you about any conflict with him. David zipped up his suitcase and headed for the door. "I have to go." "David, wait, how do you know about Marcus?" But he was already gone, leaving me alone in our apartment with the wreckage of my life. That's when I realized this wasn't just bad luck or terrible timing. This was orchestrated, planned, deliberate. David knew about Marcus because they were working together. After David left, I did what any rational person would do when their entire life explodes in a single day. I opened a bottle of wine, ordered Chinese food, and started stalking people on social media. I'd never been the type to obsess over social media. I had accounts, but I rarely posted and even more rarely scrolled through other people's updates. But desperate times call for desperate measures, and I was definitely desperate. I started with David's Instagram. His last post was from 3 days ago, a photo of his breakfast at a trendy downtown restaurant I'd never been to. The caption read, "New beginnings." I scrolled through his recent posts, looking for clues about his secret relationship. Most of his photos were work-related or generic city shots, but there were subtle changes I hadn't noticed before. His lunch spots were different, more upscale. His weekend activities had shifted from hiking and home improvement projects to art galleries and wine bars. His whole lifestyle had become more sophisticated, more urban. Then I found it, a photo from 2 weeks ago. David at a rooftop bar, laughing with a group of people. The caption was simple, "Good times with great people." But when I zoomed in on the background, I could see a woman's reflection in the window behind him. Dark hair, professional attire, familiar face. I screenshot the image and enhanced it on my laptop. The woman was Elena Vasquez, Marcus's assistant. My hands were shaking as I navigated to Elena's Instagram. Her account was private, but I could see her profile picture clearly. It was definitely the same woman from David's photo. I created a fake account using my college email address and sent Elena a follow request. To my surprise, she accepted it within minutes. Her account was full of carefully curated lifestyle photos, expensive restaurants, designer clothes, weekend trips to Wisconsin and Michigan. But it was her recent posts that made my heart race. 2 weeks ago, a photo of wine glasses at the same rooftop bar where David had been, with the caption, "Cheers to new adventures." 10 days ago, a sunset photo taken from what looked like David's apartment building, with the caption, "Sometimes the best view is right in front of you." 1 week ago, a photo of 2 coffee cups on a wooden table, with the caption, "Morning conversations are the best conversations." I recognized that wooden table. It was the one David had built for our kitchen. Eleanor had been in our apartment. She'd been sitting at our table, drinking coffee, probably planning how to destroy my life. I called Rachel, my best friend since college. She was a paralegal at a downtown law firm, practical and analytical, the kind of person who could help me make sense of what I was discovering. "Sarah, slow down," Rachel said when I called her at 11 p.m., hysterical with wine and revelations. "You're saying David was cheating on you with Marcus's assistant." "Not just cheating," I said, "working with her." "This was all planned, Rachel. The timing, the betrayal, everything. That's a serious accusation. Are you sure you're not just connecting dots that aren't really there?" "Come over," I said. "I'll show you everything." Rachel arrived 30 minutes later with coffee and tissues. She found me in my living room, surrounded by printouts of social media posts, handwritten timelines, and my laptop displaying a complex web of connections I'd been mapping. "Okay," she said, sitting down beside me. "Walk me through this." I showed her the Instagram photos, the timeline of David's behavior changes, the evidence of Elena's presence in our apartment. Rachel listened carefully, asking questions, playing devil's advocate. "It's circumstantial," she said finally, "but it's compelling. If David and Elena were working together, it would explain how Marcus got access to your work." "David helped me organize my files," I said. "He convinced me to back everything up to the cloud. He had my passwords, my login information, access to everything. But why would he do this? What did he have to gain?" That was the question that had been haunting me all evening. Why would David, who claimed to love me, orchestrate my professional destruction? "I don't know yet," I said, "but I'm going to find out." The next morning, I called in sick to work. I couldn't face seeing Marcus celebrate his victory, couldn't pretend that everything was normal when my entire life had been turned upside down. Instead, I drove to David's construction site. I'd been there before, bringing him lunch or picking him up for dinner. It was a high-rise development in the Loop, and David's company was handling the electrical work. I knew his schedule, knew he'd be on site by 7 a.m. But when I arrived, the site foreman told me David hadn't been working there for weeks. "He was laid off about 2 months ago," the foreman said. "Budget cuts. We had to let go of half the crew." 2 months ago. Right around the time David started acting strange. Right around the time Elena started posting about new adventures. David had been unemployed for 2 months and hadn't told me. He'd been leaving the apartment every morning, pretending to go to work, maintaining the illusion of normalcy, while secretly planning my destruction. But if he wasn't working, how was he supporting himself? How was he affording those expensive restaurants and wine bars? I spent the rest of the day conducting my own investigation. I drove to the unemployment office, pretending to be David's concerned girlfriend, asking about his benefits status. I called his construction company, claiming to be verifying employment for a loan application. I even contacted his union, asking about his membership status. The picture that emerged was devastating. David had been laid off 9 weeks ago, but he'd never filed for unemployment benefits. He'd let his union membership lapse. He'd made no effort to find new work. But somehow, he'd been living well, better than when he was employed. That evening, I called Detective Morrison, a private investigator Rachel had recommended. Morrison specialized in corporate espionage and insurance fraud, the kind of cases that required careful documentation and digital forensics. I need to know how my work was stolen, I told her. I need to know who was involved and why they did it. Morrison was expensive, $200 an hour, but she was thorough. Within 48 hours, she had information that changed everything. Elena Vasquez had been depositing cash into her bank account for the past 2 months. Large amounts, always in cash, always on Fridays. The deposits were consistent with payments for services rendered. David Torres had opened a new bank account 6 weeks ago. The account had received regular deposits, also in cash, also on Fridays. The amounts were smaller than Elena's, but they were substantial enough to support his lifestyle. Most importantly, both Elena and David had been receiving payments from the same source, a shell company registered in Delaware, owned by Marcus Webb. Marcus had been paying them. For 2 months he'd been financing their operation, funding their betrayal, buying their cooperation and stealing my work. But there was more. Morrison had traced Marcus's digital footprint and discovered that he'd been planning to leave Henderson and Associates for months. He'd registered a business license for his own marketing firm, secured office space in River North, even started recruiting potential employees. But starting a new agency required capital, clients, and credibility. Marcus had the capital. He'd been saving for years, but he needed a signature client to establish credibility and attract investors. The Henderson Group was perfect. They were exactly the kind of high-profile client that could launch a new agency, the kind of account that would attract other major brands. But Marcus didn't have the expertise to win Henderson. He was a luxury brand specialist, not a retail expert. He needed someone who understood mass-market consumers, someone who could develop the kind of comprehensive strategy that would impress a major retailer. He needed me. So he'd studied my work, learned my methods, and then orchestrated my destruction so he could steal my ideas and build his own empire. David and Elena were his accomplices. Elena provided inside information about Marcus's plans and access to company resources. David provided access to my work and personal information. In return, Marcus paid them both and promised them positions at his new firm. It was an elaborate con, months in the planning, executed with precision and ruthlessness. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated me. The more I learned about their conspiracy, the angrier I became. Not just angry, furious. These people had violated my trust, stolen my work, and destroyed my life for their own gain. They'd turned my love into a weapon against me, perverted my generosity into vulnerability. But anger, I was learning, could be a powerful motivator. It could sharpen your focus, clarify your priorities, give you the energy to fight back. I wasn't just going to expose them, I was going to destroy them. Detective Morrison had given me the evidence I needed to prove their guilt, but evidence alone wasn't enough. I needed a strategy, a plan that would use their own weaknesses against them. I spent the next week studying my enemies, learning their habits, their relationships, their vulnerabilities. I read their social media posts, followed their routines, observed their interactions. I became an expert on their lives, their ambitions, their fears. Marcus's weakness was his ego. He couldn't resist taking credit for brilliant work, even when it wasn't his. He needed recognition, admiration, validation. He'd built his entire career on being the smartest person in the room. Elena's weakness was her ambition. She was desperate to advance her career, to escape her role as an assistant and become a marketing professional. She'd do anything to achieve her goals, even if it meant betraying innocent people. David's weakness was his insecurity. He'd always felt threatened by my success, my education, my confidence. He'd never been able to accept that I earned more than he did, that I had opportunities he couldn't access. His betrayal wasn't just about money, it was about power, about finally being in control. Understanding their weaknesses was the key to destroying them. I just needed to be patient, clever, and absolutely ruthless. The revenge I was planning wouldn't just expose their crimes, it would use their own personalities against them, turn their strengths into weaknesses, their allies into enemies. It would be poetic justice, and it would be devastating. Revenge, I discovered, is not an emotion, it's a discipline. It requires patience, planning, and an almost scientific understanding of human psychology. You can't just lash out in anger. You have to think strategically, identify pressure points, and apply force with surgical precision. I spent 3 weeks planning my counterattack. I studied my enemies like a general studying opposing forces, mapping their relationships, their routines, their vulnerabilities. I documented everything: their meeting schedules, their social media activity, their financial transactions, their personal habits. Detective Morrison continued gathering evidence, but I was building something more sophisticated than a simple legal case. I was constructing a trap that would use their own ambitions against them. The key to my plan was understanding the psychological dynamics between Marcus, Elena, and David. They thought they were partners, but they were actually competitors. Each of them was using the others to achieve their own goals, and none of them fully trusted their accomplices. Marcus needed Elena for inside information, and David for access to my work, but he also saw them as liabilities. They were witnesses to his crimes, people who could destroy him if they ever turned against him. Elena needed Marcus for career advancement and David for emotional support, but she also resented being dependent on them. She was smarter than both of them, more sophisticated, more capable. She believed she deserved better than being a supporting character in their scheme. David needed Marcus for employment and Elena for validation, but he also felt threatened by their success. He was the least educated, the least skilled, the most vulnerable member of their group. He was constantly worried about being discarded when he was no longer useful. These tensions were the fault lines I would exploit. I would turn them against each other, make them question each other's loyalty, force them to choose between their own interests and their partnership. But first, I needed to establish my new identity. Sarah Chen, the naive marketing manager who trusted everyone, was gone. In her place was someone harder, smarter, more dangerous. Someone who understood that in the real world, nice people finish last. I started by changing my appearance. I cut my hair shorter, updated my wardrobe, invested in better makeup. I wanted to project confidence and control, wanted people to see me as someone who couldn't be manipulated or dismissed. I also began networking aggressively. I reached out to former colleagues, industry contacts, potential allies. I attended marketing conferences, joined professional organizations, made myself visible in the business community. I was building a reputation as someone who understood the industry, someone who could be trusted with sensitive information. Most importantly, I was establishing relationships with people who could help me execute my plan. The first phase of my revenge involved Elena Vasquez. She was the most vulnerable member of their group, the one most likely to make a mistake under pressure. She was also the most ambitious, which made her the most manipulable. I created a fake LinkedIn profile under the name Jennifer Morrison, using Detective Morrison's first name with a generic surname. The profile listed me as a senior recruiter for a prestigious marketing firm in New York, specializing in placing high-level executives at major corporations. I spent days crafting the perfect profile, complete with professional photos, detailed work history, and recommendations from fake colleagues. I even created a fake company website, complete with client testimonials and case studies. The profile was designed to appeal specifically to Elena's aspirations. The company specialized in luxury brands and high-end retail, exactly the kind of work Elena wanted to do. The position I was supposedly trying to fill was Director of Strategic Marketing, exactly the kind of role Elena dreamed of having. I researched Elena's background thoroughly, studying her LinkedIn profile, her resume, her social media presence. I learned about her education, her career goals, her professional interests. I wanted to understand exactly what would motivate her to take risks. Then I sent her a message. "Hello, Elena. I came across your profile and was impressed by your background in marketing and brand strategy. I'm currently working with a client to fill a Director of Strategic Marketing position, and I think you might be an excellent fit. The role involves working with luxury retail brands and would offer significant career advancement opportunities. Would you be interested in a confidential discussion about this opportunity?" Elena responded within 2 hours. She was very interested, eager to learn more about the position and the company. She asked thoughtful questions about the role, the compensation, the growth potential. I played it perfectly, giving her just enough information to keep her interested while maintaining an air of exclusivity and urgency. I told her the client was a major luxury conglomerate expanding into the American market, that they needed someone with her specific skill set, that the position would be created only for the right candidate. We exchanged several messages over the course of a week, building rapport and trust. I praised her work at Henderson & Associates, complimented her strategic thinking, made her feel valued and respected. I was everything Marcus wasn't: appreciative, supportive, focused on her potential rather than her limitations. Finally, I suggested we meet in person to discuss the opportunity in detail. I'll be in Chicago next week meeting with another client, I wrote. Would you be available for coffee on Thursday afternoon? I'd love to discuss this opportunity with you in person. Elena agreed immediately. We arranged to meet at a trendy coffee shop in River North, not far from her office. I chose the location carefully. It was upscale enough to feel legitimate, busy enough to provide cover, but quiet enough for a serious conversation. The day of our meeting, I arrived early and positioned myself at a corner table where I could observe the entire cafe. I was wearing a professional black suit, carrying a leather briefcase, projecting the image of a successful executive recruiter. Elena arrived exactly on time, looking nervous but excited. She was dressed professionally, carrying a portfolio that probably contained her resume and work samples. She looked around the cafe uncertainly before spotting me. "Jennifer," she said, approaching my table. "Elena, so nice to meet you in person," I said, standing to shake her hand. "Thank you for taking the time to meet with me." For the next hour, I conducted the most elaborate job interview of my life. I asked Elena about her career goals, her experience with luxury brands, her strategic thinking process. I took notes, nodded thoughtfully, asked follow-up questions that demonstrated deep knowledge of the marketing industry. Elena was impressive, I had to admit. She was articulate, intelligent, strategically minded. Under different circumstances, I might have genuinely wanted to hire her. But these weren't different circumstances, and I had a different agenda. "I'm curious about your current role," I said. "Henderson & Associates has a good reputation, but I imagine you're looking for more challenging opportunities." "Absolutely," Elena said. "I've learned a lot there, but I'm ready for more responsibility, more strategic work. Tell me about some of the projects you've worked on recently. I'm particularly interested in how you approach retail clients." Elena's eyes lit up. This was exactly the kind of question she'd been hoping for, the chance to demonstrate her expertise and strategic thinking. "Well, I recently worked on a major retail account, the Henderson Group. It was a complete brand overhaul, really complex and interesting work." "That sounds fascinating. What was your role on the project?" I provided strategic support to the account manager. I helped with research, client communication, presentation development." I leaned forward, showing intense interest. "That sounds like significant responsibility. Tell me more about your specific contributions." Elena began describing her work on the Henderson account, taking credit for research she'd never done, strategies she'd never developed, client relationships she'd never built. She was describing my work but presenting it as her own accomplishments. "Impressive," I said, taking notes. "It sounds like you have exactly the kind of retail expertise we're looking for." The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, with Elena becoming increasingly comfortable and confident. She was selling herself, trying to impress me, convinced that this was her opportunity to escape her current situation and advance her career. "I have to ask," I said finally, "are you currently working on any similar projects? I want to make sure there wouldn't be any conflicts of interest." "Oh no," Elena said quickly. "The Henderson project was just completed. I'm actually looking for new challenges. And you'd be available to start relatively soon." "Absolutely. I mean, I'd need to give appropriate notice, but I'm very interested in this opportunity." I closed my notebook and smiled. "Elena, I'm impressed. You're exactly the kind of candidate we're looking for. I'd like to move forward with the next step in our process." "That's wonderful," Elena said, beaming. "What would that involve?" "I'd like you to put together a comprehensive portfolio of your work, including detailed case studies of your most successful projects. I'll need to see examples of your strategic thinking, your creative process, your client management skills." "Of course, when would you need that?" "As soon as possible. This client is moving quickly, and I want to present your candidacy while they're still focused on filling the position." Elena nodded eagerly. "I can have something ready by early next week." "Perfect. One more thing. This process needs to remain completely confidential. The client is very sensitive about their expansion plans, and any leaks could jeopardize the entire project." "I understand completely. I won't mention this to anyone." We exchanged contact information, and Elena left the coffee shop walking on air. She thought she'd just landed the interview of a lifetime. She had no idea she'd just confessed to corporate espionage, because the entire conversation had been recorded. I'd chosen the coffee shop partly because Detective Morrison had already confirmed it was a single-party consent state for recording. The briefcase I'd been carrying contained a high-quality digital recorder, capturing every word of Elena's claims about her work on the Henderson account. More importantly, Elena had just agreed to provide me with a comprehensive portfolio of her work. If she followed through, and her ambition suggested she would, she'd be creating a detailed record of her theft of my intellectual property. But the recording was just the beginning. The real trap was still being set. 3 days later, Elena sent me a detailed email outlining her portfolio, along with several attachments containing what she claimed were examples of her strategic work. As I'd expected, the portfolio was largely based on my Henderson research, presented as her own accomplishments. I responded with enthusiasm, praising her strategic thinking and creative approach. I told her the client was impressed with her background and wanted to move forward with the next phase of the interview process. However, I wrote, "There's one complication we need to address. We've heard rumors that another marketing firm is trying to recruit Henderson and Associates employees, possibly offering them positions in exchange for confidential client information. Obviously, we can't be associated with any candidate who might be involved in that kind of unethical behavior." Elena's response was immediate and panicked. She insisted she had no involvement in any corporate espionage, that her work was entirely legitimate, that she would never compromise client confidentiality. "I'm so glad to hear that," I replied, "but I need to be completely transparent with you. We've heard specifically that Marcus Webb, one of your colleagues, might be involved in this situation. Since you work closely with him, I wanted to make sure you weren't inadvertently caught up in anything inappropriate." This was the moment of truth. Eleanor could either defend Marcus, protecting their partnership, or she could distance herself from him, prioritizing her own interests. She chose herself. "Actually," she wrote, "I've been concerned about Marcus's behavior lately. He's been asking a lot of questions about client files, staying late to access other people's work, acting secretive about his projects. I've wondered if he might be planning something unethical." "That's very troubling," I responded. "Have you noticed any specific incidents that concerned you?" Eleanor's response was devastating. She detailed Marcus's theft of my work, his manipulation of company files, his conspiracy to steal the Henderson account. She described how he'd recruited her and David, how he'd paid them for their cooperation, how he'd planned to use the stolen work to launch his own firm. She was confessing to everything, thinking she was protecting her career prospects, but she was actually providing me with the evidence I needed to destroy all of them. The next phase of my plan focused on David. He was the most psychologically vulnerable member of their group, the one most likely to crack under pressure. He was also the one I understood best, having lived with him for 3 years. I knew David's insecurities, his fears, his weaknesses. I knew he was constantly worried about being discovered, about losing his newfound financial security, about being abandoned by his new allies. I knew he felt guilty about what he'd done to me, even if he'd never admit it. I also knew he was living a lie. He'd been unemployed for months, pretending to have a legitimate job while actually being paid for corporate espionage. He was in a relationship with Elena, but he was also terrified of being exposed as a fraud. I decided to exploit his deepest fear, being revealed as the pathetic, desperate person he'd become. I created another fake identity, this time as a private investigator working for an insurance company. I sent David a letter, on official letterhead, informing him that his former employer was conducting an investigation into potential workers' compensation fraud. The letter was carefully worded to sound legitimate, while also being deliberately vague. I suggested that someone had reported him for continuing to receive benefits while actually working elsewhere, that there were discrepancies in his employment records, that he needed to provide documentation of his current employment status. I knew this would terrify David. He'd been living off Marcus's payments while letting everyone believe he was legitimately employed. If anyone investigated his finances, they'd discover the truth immediately. The letter instructed him to call a phone number within 48 hours to schedule an interview. The number was a burner phone I'd purchased specifically for this purpose. David called within 6 hours. "This is David Torres," he said, his voice shaky. "I received a letter about an investigation. Mr. Torres, thank you for calling. I'm Detective Johnson with Allied Insurance Investigations. We're looking into some irregularities in your employment and benefits records. I don't understand. I haven't filed for any benefits. That's part of the problem, Mr. Torres. According to our records, you were laid off from Midwest Construction 9 weeks ago, but you never filed for unemployment benefits. Meanwhile, we have reports that you've been receiving regular payments from an unknown source." David was silent for a long moment. "I don't know what you're talking about. Mr. Torres, I'm going to be direct with you. We have evidence that you've been receiving cash payments from a third party while claiming to be unemployed. This could constitute fraud on multiple levels. What kind of cooperation? We need to understand the source of these payments. We need to know who's been paying you and why. I don't know what you're talking about. Mr. Torres, let me be very clear. We're investigating a corporate espionage case. We believe someone has been paying employees to steal confidential information from their companies. If you're involved in this, the consequences could be severe. Federal charges, prison time, permanent criminal record." David was quiet for almost a minute. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. What if someone was forced to participate? What if they didn't want to be involved? That would be a mitigating factor. But we'd need full cooperation. Names, dates, documentation, everything. I need time to think. Mr. Torres, time is not a luxury you have. This investigation is moving forward with or without your cooperation. The question is whether you want to be treated as a victim or a perpetrator. I let that sink in for a moment, then continued. I'm going to give you 24 hours to decide. If you want to cooperate, call this number tomorrow. If I don't hear from you, I'll assume you're choosing not to help us, and we'll proceed accordingly. David called back the next morning.
"I want to cooperate," he said, "but I need guarantees. I need to know that I won't be charged if I tell you everything. Mr. Torres, I can't make legal guarantees, but I can tell you that cooperation is always viewed favorably by prosecutors. The question is whether you're willing to provide complete, honest information. Yes, I'll tell you everything." And he did. Over the next hour, David confessed to his entire role in the conspiracy. He explained how Marcus had recruited him, how he'd been paid to steal my work, how he'd provided access to my files and personal information. He described the timeline of the operation, the methods they'd used, the division of responsibilities. Most importantly, he provided me with text messages between himself and Elena, documenting their coordination of the theft. He also gave me details about Marcus's payments, his business plans, his client recruitment efforts. David thought he was confessing to a federal investigator, hoping to avoid criminal charges. He was actually confessing to his victim, providing me with the evidence I needed to destroy him. But the confession was just the beginning. The real destruction was still to come.
The beauty of a well-planned revenge is that it unfolds like a symphony, with each movement building on the previous one, creating a crescendo of destruction that feels both inevitable and surprising. By the time I was ready to execute the final phase of my plan, I had enough evidence to destroy Marcus, Elena, and David in multiple ways. I had recordings of Elena claiming credit for my work, documentation of Marcus's corporate espionage, and David's full confession to the entire conspiracy. But evidence alone wasn't enough. I wanted them to experience the same feelings I'd experienced: the betrayal, the humiliation, the sense of powerlessness. I wanted them to understand what they'd done to me, to feel the consequences of their actions in the most personal way possible. The final phase would turn them against each other, destroy their relationships, and eliminate any possibility of them working together again. It would be poetic justice, using their own weaknesses and ambitions to bring about their downfall. I started with Marcus, because he was the architect of the entire conspiracy. He was also the most arrogant, the most confident in his success. He thought he'd gotten away with the perfect crime, that he'd successfully stolen my work and built his new career on my achievements. I waited until Marcus's new firm was almost ready to launch. He'd signed a lease for office space, hired a small staff, and was preparing to announce his departure from Henderson and Associates. He was planning to take several clients with him, including the Henderson Group account he'd stolen from me. That's when I struck. I anonymously sent Patricia Kim, the Henderson Group's marketing director, a comprehensive package of evidence documenting Marcus's theft of my work. The package included the original timestamps of my files, my handwritten research notes, my interview recordings with Henderson executives, and Elena's recorded confession claiming credit for my work. Most importantly, I included a detailed timeline showing how Marcus had used inside information to steal my strategic insights, then presented them as his own work to win the Henderson account. Patricia was furious. She'd been impressed by Marcus's presentation, but learning that it was stolen work made her question everything about their relationship. She immediately called an emergency meeting with Janet Reeves, demanding an explanation. Janet was caught completely off guard. She'd believed Marcus's version of events, trusted his evidence, supported his presentation to Henderson. Learning that she'd been deceived by her own employee was professionally embarrassing and personally humiliating. The confrontation between Janet and Marcus was legendary. Janet accused Marcus of fraud, theft, and professional misconduct. Marcus tried to deny everything, but the evidence was overwhelming. His lies unraveled quickly under pressure, and eventually he had no choice but to admit the truth. Henderson and Associates terminated Marcus immediately. They also terminated their relationship with the Henderson Group, rather than try to explain how they'd allowed an employee to steal intellectual property and present it as original work. But Patricia Kim had a different idea. She called me directly. "Sarah, I owe you an apology," she said. "I had no idea that Marcus had stolen your work. Your original strategy was brilliant, and I'm embarrassed that we were deceived. Thank you for saying that, Patricia. It means a lot to me. I want to make this right. The Henderson Group is terminating our contract with Henderson and Associates, and we'd like to offer you a position as our Director of Marketing Strategy. We want to work with you directly, not through an agency that can't be trusted." The offer was everything I'd hoped for, and more. The salary was double what I'd been making at Henderson and Associates. The title was the promotion I'd been working toward. Most importantly, it was recognition that my work had value, that I was the real architect of the Henderson strategy. I accepted the position immediately, but Marcus's professional destruction was just the beginning. I also wanted to destroy his personal relationships, his reputation in the industry, and his ability to start over somewhere else. I sent copies of the evidence to everyone in Marcus's professional network, his former colleagues, his industry contacts, his potential clients. I made sure that everyone in the Chicago marketing community knew exactly what Marcus had done, how he'd stolen my work, how he'd betrayed the trust of his employer and his client. The response was swift and devastating. Marcus's reputation was destroyed overnight. The clients he'd been planning to take with him canceled their contracts. The staff he'd hired for his new firm quit before the company even launched. His professional network turned against him, viewing him as a liability and a fraud. Marcus tried to salvage his career by moving to another city, but the marketing industry is smaller than most people realize. Word travels fast, and Marcus's reputation followed him wherever he went. He was effectively blacklisted from the industry he'd spent his entire career building. But I wasn't finished with him yet. I also sent the evidence to the Illinois State Attorney's Office, filing a formal complaint for corporate espionage and theft of intellectual property. While the criminal case would take time to develop, the civil implications were immediate. Henderson and Associates sued Marcus for damages, seeking to recover the money they'd lost when the Henderson Group terminated their contract. The Henderson Group also filed suit, claiming they'd been defrauded by Marcus's misrepresentation of stolen work. Marcus's legal bills mounted quickly. He was forced to sell his house, his car, and most of his possessions to pay for his defense. His savings were wiped out, his credit was destroyed, and his future prospects were non-existent. The man who'd once been so confident, so successful, so sure of his superiority, was reduced to working temporary jobs and living in a studio apartment. He'd lost everything: his career, his reputation, his financial security, his sense of self. But Marcus's destruction was just one movement in my symphony of revenge. Elena and David were still to come. Elena had been counting on Marcus's success to advance her own career. She'd been promised a senior position at his new firm, a chance to escape her role as an assistant and become a marketing executive. When Marcus's company collapsed, her dreams collapsed with it. But I had a special punishment planned for Elena, one that would exploit her deepest insecurity about her professional abilities. I sent her recorded confession to every marketing firm in Chicago, along with evidence of her theft of my intellectual property. The recording was devastating. Elena clearly claiming credit for work she'd never done, describing strategies she'd never developed, taking ownership of achievements that belonged to me. The marketing community was shocked. Elena had been known as a competent assistant, someone who was ambitious but professional. Learning that she'd been stealing credit for other people's work destroyed her reputation immediately. Henderson and Associates terminated Elena's employment, citing her violation of confidentiality agreements and her theft of proprietary information. They also filed suit against her for damages, seeking to recover the money they'd lost due to her participation in the conspiracy. But Elena's professional destruction was just the beginning. I also wanted to destroy her personal relationships, particularly her relationship with David. I sent David a copy of Elena's recorded confession, along with a note explaining that she'd been trying to distance herself from him to protect her own career prospects. I made sure he understood that Elena had been portraying him as the primary perpetrator of the conspiracy, claiming that she'd been reluctantly drawn into his scheme. The note was carefully crafted to exploit David's insecurities about his relationship with Elena. I suggested that she'd been using him for financial support and professional connections, that she'd never actually cared about him as a person. David's response was exactly what I'd hoped for. He was furious, hurt, and determined to prove that Elena was equally guilty of the conspiracy. He began documenting her role in the theft, gathering evidence of her participation, preparing to expose her if necessary. The relationship between Elena and David deteriorated rapidly. They began accusing each other of being the mastermind behind the conspiracy, each trying to minimize their own role while maximizing their partner's guilt. Their mutual accusations provided me with additional evidence of their crimes, but more importantly, they eliminated any possibility of them supporting each other through the legal and professional consequences of their actions. Elena was forced to take a job in retail, working at a department store for minimum wage. Her dreams of becoming a marketing executive were destroyed, replaced by the reality of folding clothes and dealing with difficult customers. She tried to rebuild her career, but the marketing industry is unforgiving of professional misconduct. Every job application was met with rejection. Every interview ended with questions about her past behavior. She was effectively blacklisted from the industry she'd tried so hard to enter. But David's punishment was perhaps the most fitting of all, because it exploited the weakness that had made him vulnerable to Marcus's manipulation in the first place, his insecurity about his own worth. I made sure that David's full confession was shared with his family, his friends, and his former colleagues. I wanted everyone to know exactly what he'd done, how he'd betrayed someone who loved him, how he'd sold his integrity for money. The response was devastating. David's family was ashamed of his behavior, his friends felt betrayed by his deception, and his former colleagues viewed him as untrustworthy. He was ostracized from his social circle, isolated from his support network. But the most devastating consequence was the loss of his relationship with Eleanor. When she learned about his confession to the fake federal investigator, she realized that he'd been prepared to throw her under the bus to save himself.
the final confrontation between Eleanor and David was everything I'd hoped for. They accused each other of betrayal, of manipulation, of using their relationship for personal gain. They destroyed each other emotionally, saying things that could never be taken back, revealing truths that poisoned any possibility of reconciliation. Eleanor moved out of their shared apartment, leaving David alone with his guilt and his shame. She told him that she'd never loved him, that she'd been using him from the beginning, that he was pathetic and desperate. David was devastated. He'd lost his career, his reputation, his relationship, and his self-respect. He'd traded everything meaningful in his life for a few months of stolen prosperity. The last I heard, David was working construction again, struggling to find steady employment due to his damaged reputation. He was living with his elderly parents, single and lonely, trying to rebuild his life from the ground up. But the most satisfying aspect of my revenge wasn't the individual punishments I'd inflicted on Marcus, Elena, and David. It was the way they'd turned against each other, the way their alliance had crumbled under pressure, the way they'd revealed their true characters when their own interests were threatened. They'd betrayed me, but in the end they'd betrayed each other too. Their conspiracy had been built on selfishness and greed, and those same qualities had ultimately destroyed them.
2 years later, I'm sitting in my corner office at the Henderson Group, looking out at the Chicago skyline. The view is spectacular. I can see the lake, the downtown buildings, the busy streets filled with people pursuing their own dreams and ambitions. My office is twice the size of my old cubicle at Henderson & Associates. I have a team of 12 people working under me, all of them skilled professionals who respect my expertise and appreciate my leadership style. My salary is more than I ever imagined earning, and my work is challenging, creative, and fulfilling. The Henderson Group has become one of the most successful retail chains in the Midwest, and my strategic insights have been a major factor in their growth. We've opened 50 new stores, launched a successful e-commerce platform, and expanded into 3 new states. My work has been featured in industry publications, and I've been invited to speak at marketing conferences across the country. But success isn't just about money or recognition. It's about knowing that you've earned your achievements honestly, that you've built something meaningful through your own efforts and abilities. Every morning when I arrive at the office, I'm reminded of how far I've come. I'm no longer the naive marketing manager who trusted everyone and assumed the best about people. I'm a senior executive who understands how the world really works, who can navigate complex political situations, who knows how to protect herself and her interests. The transformation wasn't easy. Learning to be strategic, calculating, and sometimes ruthless required me to change fundamental aspects of my personality. I had to become harder, more skeptical, more willing to fight for what I deserved. But I don't regret the change. The old Sarah Chen was vulnerable, trusting, easy to manipulate. The new Sarah Chen is strong, confident, and impossible to deceive. I've learned to recognize the warning signs of betrayal, to protect my work and my relationships, to strike back when necessary. People sometimes ask me if I feel guilty about what I did to Marcus, Elena, and David. They suggest that my revenge was excessive, that I should have been more forgiving, that I should have taken the high road. But I don't feel guilty at all. I feel proud. Marcus, Elena, and David made a choice to betray me. They chose to steal my work, destroy my career, and humiliate me for their own gain. They showed no mercy, no remorse, no consideration for the pain they were causing me. I simply showed them the same consideration they'd shown me. None. Marcus Webb is now working as a freelance consultant, taking on small projects for companies that don't know his history. He lives in a different city, under a different name, trying to rebuild his life far from the Chicago marketing community that rejected him. He makes a fraction of what he used to earn, and he'll never regain the reputation he lost. Last month I received a LinkedIn message from him. He was asking for my help finding work, claiming that he'd learned from his mistakes and wanted to make amends. He said he was sorry for what he'd done, that he understood how wrong he'd been, that he hoped I could forgive him. I deleted the message without responding. Some actions are unforgivable, and Marcus's betrayal was one of them. Elena Vasquez left Chicago entirely, moving to a small town in Wisconsin where she works as a marketing coordinator for a local nonprofit. It's honest work, but it's far from the glamorous executive position she'd dreamed of. She's single, living alone, starting over at an age when most people are reaching the peak of their careers. She tried to contact me once, about 6 months after everything happened. She wanted to apologize, to explain her actions, to ask for my understanding. She said she'd been desperate, that Marcus had manipulated her, that she'd never meant for things to go as far as they did. I listened to her voicemail, then deleted it. Desperation doesn't excuse betrayal, and manipulation doesn't eliminate personal responsibility. Eleanor made her choices, and she has to live with the consequences. David Torres has had the hardest time recovering from his role in the conspiracy. He's struggled to find steady work, partly because of his damaged reputation, and partly because he's lost the confidence he once had. He's been through therapy, trying to understand why he betrayed someone he claimed to love, but understanding doesn't undo the damage he caused. He's written me letters over the past 2 years, long rambling apologies that show he's still tormented by what he did. He talks about his guilt, his shame, his regret. He describes how lonely he is, how isolated he feels, how difficult it's been to rebuild his life. I read every letter, then throw them away. I'm not interested in his guilt or his loneliness. I'm not responsible for his emotional rehabilitation. He destroyed our relationship and his own life through his choices, and it's not my job to help him heal. But the most satisfying aspect of my revenge isn't the individual punishments I inflicted on my enemies. It's the way their conspiracy ultimately destroyed itself, the way their own weaknesses and ambitions became the instruments of their downfall. Marcus's ego made him overconfident, leading him to take risks that ultimately exposed him. Elena's ambition made her trust a fake recruiter, leading her to confess to crimes she thought she'd gotten away with. David's insecurity made him panic when confronted with authority, leading him to betray his own accomplices. They thought they were so clever, so sophisticated, so untouchable, but they were actually amateurs, driven by petty emotions and short-term thinking. They underestimated me, underestimated the evidence trail they were creating, and underestimated the consequences of their actions. Most importantly, they underestimated the power of patience and planning. They wanted immediate gratification, quick results, easy success. I was willing to wait, to plan, to execute a complex strategy that would destroy them completely. The experience taught me valuable lessons about human nature, about loyalty, about the importance of protecting yourself in a world where people will betray you for surprisingly little gain. It also taught me that justice isn't always served by the legal system or by karma. Sometimes you have to create your own justice. I've applied these lessons to every aspect of my life. I'm more careful about who I trust, more strategic about my relationships, more protective of my work and my reputation. I've learned to recognize the warning signs of betrayal, to document everything, to always have a backup plan, but I've also learned that success is the best revenge. Building a career I'm proud of, earning recognition for my abilities, achieving my goals through honest work, these accomplishments are more satisfying than any punishment I could inflict on my enemies. Every day I come to work, I'm reminded of how far I've come. I'm leading a team of talented professionals, developing strategies that drive real business results, building a reputation as one of the most effective marketing executives in the industry. My work is featured in case studies, my opinions are sought by industry publications, my strategies are copied by competitors. I've become exactly what I always wanted to be, a respected professional who's known for her intelligence, creativity, and results. The Henderson Group has offered me a position as Vice President of Marketing, with responsibility for all brand strategy across their retail network. It's a role that would have been impossible to achieve if I'd stayed at Henderson & Associates, if I'd remained the trusting, naive person I used to be. I'm also dating again, though I'm much more careful about who I let into my life. I've learned to recognize the signs of dishonesty, manipulation, and hidden agendas. I'm attracted to people who are confident in their own success, who don't need to steal from others to feel valuable. My current boyfriend is a successful architect who builds skyscrapers around the world. He's intelligent, honest, and secure in his own abilities. He appreciates my success rather than feeling threatened by it, supports my ambitions rather than trying to undermine them. Most importantly, he's never shown any interest in my work files or my computer passwords. He respects my privacy, my independence, and my professional boundaries. He's everything David wasn't: trustworthy, supportive, and genuinely committed to our relationship. Looking back on everything that happened, I realized that Marcus, Elena, and David actually did me a favor. They forced me to become stronger, smarter, more strategic. They taught me lessons about human nature that I never would have learned otherwise. They showed me that I was capable of fighting back, of protecting myself, of winning against seemingly impossible odds. The naive marketing manager who trusted everyone and assumed the best about people is gone. In her place is a successful executive who understands how the world really works, who can navigate complex situations, who knows how to protect herself and her interests. I sleep well at night, knowing that I've earned everything I have through my own efforts and abilities. I wake up every morning excited about the challenges ahead, confident in my ability to handle whatever comes my way. The people who betrayed me are struggling with the consequences of their actions, trying to rebuild lives they destroyed through their own choices. But I'm not responsible for their struggles, and I'm not interested in their rehabilitation. I've moved on to better things, better relationships, better opportunities.
I've built a life I'm proud of, surrounded by people who respect and support me. I've achieved success on my own terms, without compromising my integrity or stealing from others. That's the real victory, not the punishment I inflicted on my enemies, but the life I built for myself after they tried to destroy me. They thought they could use me and discard me, steal my work and ruin my future. They were wrong about that, just as they were wrong about everything else. In the end, I got the last laugh, and it was worth every moment of planning.
That was my story of betrayal, discovery, and ultimate revenge. But now I'm curious about your story. Have you ever experienced something similar? Maybe not to this extreme, but have you been betrayed by someone you trusted? A colleague who stole your ideas? A partner who cheated with someone close to you? A friend who turned against you when you needed them most? I would love to hear if you experienced something like this in the comments down below. If you relate to my story, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about betrayals, revenges, and more. Remember, you're stronger than you think, and you deserve people in your life who respect and value you. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise.